Hi, Lucas. How are you?
Hey Laura, how you doing?
Good, and you?
Good, yeah, it's great to see you.
You too. You too. It's been a little while.
Yeah.
So, um, obviously, I'm interviewing you about your really awesome upcoming SugarLift show, and I just want to hear all about it. So, please tell me, what is the overarching theme of your show?
So the overarching theme, it like pertains to that feeling of being in the forest. But because I live in Manhattan, and as you know, since you were living over here too, there's not a lot of forest. So there's only man-made forest, right? Like Central Park and stuff like that that kind of has that synthetic feel. And so I try to think of that theme as we have the idea of the forest, but then the chaos of the city is creating this kind of like filter that expresses the forest in a different way, in maybe a more like chaotic kind of synthetic way. And so when I'm painting these paintings, I'm thinking of a bit of more like an imaginary forest rather than an actual forest. And that kind of drives the theme of the show. Um, I remember we were talking uh, not too long ago about this kind of theme, right, of the forest. And um, I had actually done an artwork titled The Mighty Forest when I was a kid. And
Oh,
I believe we talked about this, but I'll just kind of talk a little
yeah.
more about it. So I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I did a group exhibition. And
Mhm.
in this group exhibition, I did this artwork called The Mighty Forest. And um, my little sister was there with me, and it kind of looked like she was my date. So I was like,
Oh, that's
I
awkward.
was like, I was like a little 10-year-old with like my date, and I was in a group
Uh-huh.
show in a gallery.
Oh.
and and so the artwork was titled The Mighty Forest, and it was of a forest, but it was kind of an imaginary forest. And there was a bear that didn't really look like a bear, and there was a landscape that really didn't look like a landscape all that much. And I realized that I started to kind of recreate that in these recent years. That I started to kind of it's almost like if I that's where I left off, and this is where I picked up on. So I did a decade of being a full-time student,
Mhm.
and it's like I where I left off I picked up again, where
Oh my
I'm
God.
just trying to like go back into my own skin, let's say.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's really cool. Would you say that because my next question is actually what inspired you, but I guess
Right.
it's really interesting that it's really just a continuation of this project you began years ago.
Yeah.
So, would you say that that was your inspiration or just, the living in New York part?
you, like the more I analyze it, the more I feel like that was my inspiration. That
Mm.
subconsciously I've just been kind of continuing those paintings or those artworks that I was doing when I was a kid. Um, Another thing that kind of inspired the series was the idea that I'm I'm a bit of an extremist, and I live with like two different minds. So there's the mind that's more academic, and there's the mind that's more abstract. And and so with these two different minds in my paintings, I'm kind of trying to do both at the same time. I'm varying the style. I'm thinking, how can I make something abstract more academic, or something academic more abstract? And I'm juggling between the two, but then at the same time, like again, like subconsciously, or maybe in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, how does this all pertain to like the bigger picture of what I want to say? And I've always been a bit of an environmentalist, and I have that kind of be the priority of the show, to just kind of think about the forest as I'm doing it, because what I've always felt was that the forest actually resolves all of those questions we have as artists. Like if you want to find a really interesting pattern, you can find it in nature. Like you could observe like a fractile pattern of cauliflower that's spiraling into infinity, like both on a macro level and on a micro level. Like you could keep magnifying it and it'll just keep spiraling. And that's, like a beautiful fractile pattern. And then there's also um, like just looking at the patterns in marble or in like rock formations or I was just looking at these like colorful this colorful mountain range that's in Peru. Like I was just looking at it the other day and I was like, whoa, like this looks like a painting in itself, like an
Yeah.
expression of nature, but this is actually nature, like that can express these like beautiful organic patterns.
Right. Yeah. I can totally see that. And it makes sense that like everything we do comes from nature. So it's a beautiful thing to return to the source, like you said, as artists, to find those answers for a lot of the questions that I feel like we get in the chaos of living in cities and living disconnected from nature in a lot of ways, especially like when we're so connected to the internet instead of like actually being outside. And yeah, even like you said, like parks can seem really artificial in a way. It's almost like controlled nature instead of actual nature.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So I know you're making like a ton of paintings. Like I think last time you had mentioned you were aiming for like 15 and you had like
Yeah.
10 or something at the time and you were like, I want to be ambitious. I want to do maybe like 15 or 20.
Yeah.
What motivates you to keep making more, especially like for this series? Because I know you're making gigantic paintings, but what is the one thing that just motivates you to keep going?
To keep going,
Mhm.
deadlines, I would say, are like our number one.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
yeah, so I always put a deadline in front of me so that I
Mhm.
know that I'm working towards something and I don't stagnate in my growth because we're always growing as painters. The
Yeah.
moment we think that a painting looks good, it means that probably the future paintings after that one are just going to be as good. But we should
Hmm.
never aim to that. We should always aim that the sky's the limit. So I
Yeah.
am just constantly investigating and keeping myself humble and just understanding that there's so much more to learn. And I briefly talked about like how I'm a bit of an extremist in both directions, right? So I had the owner of SugarLift come over, Mr. Wright, to my painting studio a couple days ago, and I had said something that just kind of popped in my mind that um, in my senior studio class, as a senior in my BFA, I was asked a question. So it was, where do you fall on this line from abstract to realism? And so a lot of the class, they were putting a line somewhere around the middle between the two, just from the nature of that school. And so I found that I kind of wanted to put the line on both sides, that I didn't want to be
Mm.
like in the middle. I wanted to
Yeah.
be on both sides. Like I felt that maybe if everyone's putting the line in the middle, like why can't I be more of who I am as a person and put it on both sides? Because that's just my personality. So then I felt that there's nothing that's kind of preventing me from doing that. And
Mhm.
then when I graduated from that school, I came over to New York and I went on the extreme direction of academic. So I
Mhm.
would have put the line like on the realism side. But then I was also working under a mentor, doing abstract paintings at night. So I would have been on the other side putting a line and
Doing both at the same time.
yeah, doing both at the same time.
Mhm.
And I felt that that's really the thing that just makes me who I am as a painter.
Mhm.
And at night, I'm reading this color textbook that is full of math problems, and it's like a physics textbook on how color interacts with different substances.
Wow.
And then I'm experimenting with abstraction, but then during the day, like I'm teaching at Grand Central Atelier, which is like extremely academic.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I'm all over the place. I feel like in an organized way, like I made that conscious decision to kind of snap into like how can I grow academically because there's room to
Mhm.
grow, and how can I grow abstractly because there's room to grow. And whoever says that, oh, abstract painting is so easy, like a kid could do that, well, it's it's a lifelong journey. In
Mm.
fact, a lot about abstract painting is finding yourself, and we'd be lucky to even find ourselves during our lifetime.
Yeah.
um and then I could make the reverse argument, right? It's like, oh, like realism, you go from point A to point B, like the person that's posing in front of you, or the still life that you're painting from, or the landscape, like that's the end result. So if you're going from point A to point B, well, that seems easy enough. but
Good
but
point.
right, but I like, just to make the reverse argument, right?
Yeah.
But then you think like, well, no, I mean, it's a lifelong journey, and no one's been able to pull it off in the history of mankind.
Mhm.
That the painting is like so well done that the person that you painted feels like that person can like come out of the painting. That's never
Right.
been done in history, where it's like, oh my gosh, it looks like the person can come out of the painting. We've
Yeah.
gotten close, and we
Mhm.
could go to the Met and see works that are very close, but
Mhm.
no one's never achieved it. So no one's achieved it on both sides. With
Yeah.
abstraction, no one's ever achieved it, and with realism. And so that's just what makes things fun, is that we're just part of, I mean, some people can think of it pessimistically, right? Like they're just frustrated painting all day, trying to make something as realistic as they can.
Yeah.
But I just think that it's part of the fun to just understand that it's more about the process of making it that should keep you
Mhm.
motivated and inspired, rather than the ending point, because no one's achieved the ending point. So we could be very, very pessimistic if we think of it that way, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, um, it's very true because like especially in like academic schools, and since you know firsthand too,
Yeah.
everyone just becomes so obsessed with the end results. It's like
Hmm.
the thing that got them to the school, which is like their love of creating, like it's almost like it dies at the end because they're so terrified of their painting looking like crap at the end
Yeah.
that they forget to actually enjoy making it. um
Right.
yeah, and I know because that's happened to me. Now I'm like, I'm over it. I'm like, no, I'm actually gonna let myself enjoy this. No one's gonna tell me it sucks. I don't have to show this to someone if I don't feel like it,
Hmm.
and I'm just gonna like let myself enjoy it. That's it. So yeah,
Well,
that's
that's great news. So you feel now a little more free in that
yeah,
way.
yeah. And you seem like you're also aiming for that too, where you're just enjoying the process, right?
The process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about your process. Like, how do you come up with the paintings? Like, how do you decide on the compositions?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go a little bit into that. So um composition before used to be very mechanical to me. So I was studying Jay Hambage's book, Dynamic Symmetry, and I was looking at all these different compositions. I was memorizing all these, again, math formulas. I don't know why I think of math in formulas, but I actually think of form, like academic form turning, like when we're rendering. I think of that mathematically also, but I'll go into that later. So with compositions, I got really mechanical. So it's like you have the golden section rectangle, 1.618 ratio. You have another dynamic symmetry ratio, which is the root 2, and that's 1.4142. You have root 3, 1.713. And I'm just like memorizing all these different dynamic symmetry compositions, and I'm like dividing one side of the rectangle with the other side, figuring out like what is the exact ratio of this, and what is the science behind that composition? What is the armature? So a composition, I I feel, is the armature of the picture, just like anatomy is the armature of a person. So if we have no training in anatomy whatsoever, well, maybe we'll get lucky because we've rendered something so well that it's like, oh, it looks like you have really good anatomy knowledge. Um, but it's just a little bit nicer to actually know anatomy, and it's just a little bit nicer to actually know composition.
Yeah.
So this armature, so this armature ended up getting a little too mathematical for me. So just like if you overdo anatomy, then you end up with really bad drawings because all your landmarks are over accentuated.
Hmm.
Um, the same thing happened with composition. So now I actually don't do dynamic symmetry rectangles at all, but subconsciously I kind of do it. Like I am using a few dynamic symmetry rectangles in the show, but I'm not gridding out the armature and making sure that everything falls just where it needs to be. I'm being a little
Hmm.
more intuitive. And then just as like the final push, like the cherry on the topping, then I start to think, well, how is this conforming to the rectangle? So you have like a series of questions to ask yourself. You have, what is the rubated square of the inner rectangle? So um, if you get the width and then you swing that over and get the height, you get the inner square of the rectangle. And
Right.
things that happen in that section are of importance. Then you also have the Baroque diagonal, which is an uplifting diagonal from bottom left to top right of the
Hmm.
rectangle. And then you have top left to bottom right being the sinister, which makes you feel like more depressed, right?
Yeah.
So then you have like different emotional qualities to how um like the thing is gestured. So is it like gestured inclinating towards the Baroque or towards the sinister? Um, and then also just like the structure of the rectangle. Some rectangles divide in thirds, some divide in fourths. Uh, and you could get a rectangle and divide it in thirds that actually has to be divided in fourths, and you're actually doing the wrong thing, which is interesting because that's just not how the rectangle works. So it's like you can't necessarily divide a square into thirds because it's made up of fourths. So it's like if you divide it into,
Hmm.
so that's where the like math comes in, where like I started to subdivide everything,
Hmm.
and then things just get a little too formulaic, and that makes things not as fun. So then now, maybe I'm just like, well, I'll just divide a square into thirds. Like, but back then I was very, very mathematical. Like
Hmm.
I needed to have like the arabesque fall like right where it needed to be, and all these like other adjustments. So to kind of like finish your question, like
Mhm.
now what I do is I just get Photoshop and I throw like different images onto Photoshop.
Mhm.
So um so for example, like I just had a friend of mine pose, um and he was was like he was laying down. So the way that I'll give a tour of my studio in a bit, but so the
Mhm.
way he was laying down on the ground, and then my loft apartment has a second floor, so I was taking photos from the second floor while he was laying down on the bottom floor, and he was doing dynamic poses, so it kind of then feels like when you when I was cutting him out on Photoshop, it felt like he's like floating, right?
Yeah, floating. Yeah.
So so then I got a background from I'm just like always exploring for different imagery. So I got a background of a landscape, and then I just threw him onto this landscape, and I repeated him a few times. So um not the facial features of him, but just him as a person is repeated. Um
Mm.
I actually keep my contours very intact. So no matter how expressive I get, the contours are going to be very truthful, but the inner shapes are going to be more expressive. So
Mm.
I keep him intact, um, and and then I just repeat him, um, formulate in like in different ways, and my final idea was to kind of have him kind of drifting down, like almost as if like three versions of himself are kind of like gravitating towards like arriving to this landscape in like a graceful manner, not like he's falling towards the landscape.
Right.
So so that's how that's fresh in my head, so that's why I kind of described that one. And also I had I had these different ideas in the past of repetition. So I had
Mhm.
ideas of like getting the same thing. So I was primarily a still life painter before,
Right.
and so for example, I went to a junkyard and I just got like light switches and things like that, and I would find out like, can I get a bunch of light switches and have it repeat? Um,
Mm.
so it's a bit of like an Andy Warhol kind of take where it's the repetition, so almost like consumerism.
Mhm.
Um, but then in this case, it's like repetition of person. So
Oh.
as commodity almost, but then ironically enough, engaged with the landscape. So if it were to be in a cityscape type setting, it might feel more like person as commodity, where I'm just
Mhm.
trying to make it feel like person in the landscape, let's say.
Yeah.
um so but then the feeling of the repetition makes you question things a little more, uh
Mhm.
as to like this is this is someone that is living in a city uh, that's very consumerist, capitalism,
Mhm.
and its repetition of a person. And then the way that the expression happens in the painting is almost like nature but on crack, because like I like to paint things very colorful.
Yeah.
So so then it mixes the ideas of maybe, like I said earlier, like the chaos of the city, but then also nature. So how they clash
Mhm.
with each other, and how
Right.
that contrast happens. And I find contrast to always be the thing that captures our attention, like a mixed emotions. Like what if someone is like very like has like a depressive kind of look about them, but then everything's colorful, right? Like it gets you kind of thinking, like it's like a clash. So I'm always thinking of that clash. So if someone's falling down and it gives you that feeling of like, oh, this is like very serene, but then there's pops of color, it kind of gives you like a clash. It's like it's serenity, but also a haphazard, colorful expression to it that you can't really find in nature.
Right.
Yeah, those are like my mixed up ideas that happen in my head. But yeah, that's how I compose. I I think of the theme of the show. I get all these different parts and I start collaging them. But then when I paint, I don't necessarily conform to the reference. The painting becomes its own kind of thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Wow. Oh my God. So like you work with a lot of, like you said, like contrast and juxtaposition, and it's interesting also the repetition of a person. Usually like in paintings, when something is repeated like that, it's like it's to emphasize. And I feel like I want to see that painting. It's like, ooh, the emphasis of like man on a landscape. I like that because it's like you're saying, like it's the reiteration of man in nature, human in nature,
Right.
instead of human in man-made controlled place.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So is there a painting in your show that you're like really attached to?
Yes. Yeah.
Ooh.
It's hard to say which one, because I'm like in between two. So like
Oh,
I
okay.
have I have the painting behind me right here that I'm
Oh.
I'm really attached to as the one where I'm taking risks and it
Mm.
both in size and in the way that I kind of constructed it. And then I have the one that is the foundation of the show, so the first one. So I would say
Mm.
the first one is the one that I'm most attached to, since that's the thing that launched the whole show.
Right.
Um, that's also the one that I showed the gallery first and kind of said like, hey, this is who I am, and let's do this thing. Like let's form a show kind of around this. And it actually took about a year to get them warmed up to the idea, and and then um and then just in September, I got the okay, I got the green light to go with it.
Nice. Oh my
So
God.
so that painting, titled that one's titled The Forest.
Mm.
So the show is kind of based off of on it. But then the one that's behind me, that painting is this 8-foot painting that goes from floor to ceiling.
Oh my God.
That is I would say the star of the show. Um,
Mhm.
so I feel attached to it in that sense. But
Nice.
yeah,
Does
and
it have
I'll make sure to show it all
yeah,
when we
yeah, I
do the
really
little
want to
tour.
see it now. Is it the one, does it have people laying down? It looks so cool.
Yeah, it's the so this painting has a female model that's repeated 3 times,
Hmm.
and same idea. Like she was on the ground. Her pose is, instead of her pose feeling more like she's falling, it's more like she's like leaning on the surface that I had created from my imagination. And then
Mm.
and then her legs are kind of up. So when she was posing, she had her feet on the wall. So she was kind of like
Oh.
doing a handstand almost. And I was on the second floor. So I get these really weird poses
Uh-huh.
because I'm taking them bird's eye view, and it's just pointing straight down, and I can get that feeling of that there's no floor underneath, and it creates a little more of like a dynamic interaction with the environment that I'm creating from my head. So it
Right.
it then leaves things to interpretation. Like is she standing and there's a glass floor, or is she like doing a handstand and
Yeah.
she's upside down? So
Right.
we just kind of don't know, and it helps then key things into this imaginary environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I want to circle back for a second to your
Yes.
we were talking about your method or your process.
Hmm.
And I'm really curious because I've seen your clips on Instagram and stuff, and I'm like, how does he pick the colors?
Oh, yeah.
How do you decide which color, why, and where? Like,
That's a great question. So, um, I would say that I I just naturally inclinate towards something. Uh, Now, okay, I have a weird way to kind of explain my process, because like throughout my life, I've always been really confident as to what I want to do, or who I want to be, or what style I want. And that's
mhm,
not the case for a lot of people.
yeah.
Like I know people that started painting just like a couple years ago. So, um, but they were like accountants before or something, or doctors. So, I like the trajectory of like the way that I've just thought of things has always just been like, oh yeah, I just need to do that. And I choose my colors the same way. Like I'll be painting expressively, and then I'll tell myself, oh yeah, that's the theme of this painting. So for example, I have one painting that I'll show in a sec,
Mhm,
which is all red themed. And I'm just like, oh yeah, this is the painting that has to do with like lava and ash and volcanoes, and like because I'm always thinking of nature throughout the
mhm,
process of the show. Whereas the one that's behind me is more like a jungle. Like it has these kind of um whimsical kind of lime greens. So
mhm,
when I'm choosing the color, I'm not necessarily thinking of all these different systems of color. Like for example, um, if I'm thinking like a tetra palette, or a complementary, or a split complementary, I'm not thinking of those so much.
mhm.
Um, I'm just kind of again intuitively doing it. So um, I guess I guess during my studies, I had the rails up when I was. It's like when you're bowling and you have the rails up,
Yeah.
and no matter what, it's gonna hit the pins. It's
Mhm,
like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do split complementary. I'm gonna do dynamic symmetry. I'm gonna use complementary colors when I'm painting. I'm gonna use warms and cools, and like then everything becomes formulaic. Whereas now it's like, okay, I had the rails up and I knew that I was gonna hit the pins, but now I have the rails down and
mhm.
I'm going for the bullseye, and I don't need to have that those training wheels. I don't need to
Yeah.
have this thing that's protecting me, because then it'll make my paintings too safe. So
Yes.
I'm allowing myself to take risks. And I was in art school for a decade to allow myself to get myself out of sticky situations, or to have some sort of level of confidence with technique and things like that. So I
Mhm.
know that if something just goes really wrong, that I could get myself back to pulling it off, hopefully. Um,
Yeah, with the fundamentals. Yeah.
yeah, with the fundamentals. So yeah, I guess all those ideas are kind of floating in there, like oh, I want this to be split complementary. Um, but then I don't necessarily make the conscious decision to look at the color wheel and say it has to be split complementary, like to the T. You know, I could
Yeah.
allow myself to make it more freely done, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, you can always just, oh, this isn't really working. I'm gonna just go back this way. Because the other issue with I guess with people who maybe haven't quite gone through the fundamentals is when something
Right.
goes wrong, they really don't know what they can do to fix it. And I feel like by
Yeah.
studying the fundamentals, you can always lean back on it, like you said, and be like, oh, okay, troubleshoot. This is what was wrong. I have to do this. Yeah. Oh my God. That's
Yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. Like I was just painting a floral before we got on, and
Mhm.
think like things were going really wrong. Then I was like, if I ask myself X, Y, and Z, then I could pull things back.
Mhm.
And so I'll get that, like I'll get that fear for a second, like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then all of a sudden I'm asking myself really logical questions
Yeah.
that like, you know, maybe only someone that's academically trained can ask, like this like series of questions that's so rigid, but then gets you back on track immediately. Um, so I absolutely do favor like figuring out the fundamentals for sure.
Mhm.
Just like you said, yeah, you can lean back on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually, I heard a quote today where I think it was, you're only afraid of something until you understand it enough that you can overcome it.
Yeah,
Like you said, you get that pang of fear of, oh no, something like I can't, what's not working. And then, like you said, you just go like, okay, this. And then
yeah,
suddenly you're not afraid anymore and you can fix. And oh, it's the best feeling in the world when you're no longer terrified of what's
yeah,
going wrong.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's do a studio tour. Let's check out your stuff. A little sneak
Yeah,
peek.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Let's do it. So, so I'm just gonna switch my camera.
Sure. Yeah.
Okie doke.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Okay, so this one was a bit of a looser, let's say, approach that I
Mhm.
actually did really quick. It was practically a nolla prima, but
Nice. Wow.
I kept it kind of away from me for a while to understand its meaning. So
Mm.
I painted it very quickly in a way that I love to paint. But then it created a barrier of, well, I can't really make things so virtuous on it. So I'm gonna put it aside and understand like what virtuosity even means when I'm
Mhm.
painting the way that I paint naturally.
Right.
So all the paintings have a bit of a different feel to them. But
Mhm.
so here's another one.
Oh man, I was looking at
I
your
could
videos of that one. I love it.
Oh, thanks. So on this one, I um I started pretty tight, and then at the moment it's, you know, there's all sorts of patterns and abstraction happening on her,
Mhm.
and then I'm pulling it back uh closer to being a little more virtuous in certain areas and being more abstract in other areas. So these are all works in progress that I'm showing right now.
Mhm.
So here's
Oh,
another.
that's the other one. I was like, oh, I love the expression in it.
Yeah, she's a contortionist, so she was able
Oh,
to
cool.
kind of move in very strange ways that really permitted more of like a dancerly feel. Like it feels
Mhm.
like she's like caught in like some sort of like contemporary dance.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so a lot of emotion in that one.
Mhm.
This is the one that I had spoken of pertaining to like more like a volcanic kind of eruption, let's say, where there's a lot of reds. So red is the theme. I just painted this section yesterday, so you could see it. It's like, I'm thinking like volcanic ash. I'm thinking of like little patterns that you see in lava. So throughout the paintings, I'm also trying to understand like where nature can resolve my biggest issues, let's say, because I painted the foot and I was like, whoa, the foot looks really boring. And then I was like, well, this is a painting about like some sort of volcanic eruption. So I then started to do the more expressive kind of jumbled up patterns that you could see in like a flowing river of lava. And some of these things are not so literally spoken, but just more of the thoughts of them occur.
Right.
This one I just started today, and so I just started to like pick out a little bit of a flower. But I only painted that flower for half an hour, so I need it tomorrow. I'm gonna go back into it.
Right.
So I just started this one, and so here's the 2-story window that I work
Cool.
from.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's a huge 2-story north light window, and then from the second floor, I take my photos. And I mean, of course, I'm taking photos from everywhere, but I tend to choose the ones that are from the second floor because it's like if I was in a regular painting studio, I'd have to be on a huge ladder to get those weird shots to happen.
Yeah.
On the ground, you could see all these little gradient squares. So I randomly told the owner of the gallery that I want to have a wall full of 12 by 12s, and they're all going to be florals. And so then I started this one. Right before we met up.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's so cool.
So I
That's
did
gonna
the
be like if
gradients
they're
on
all
this
like
today.
if they're all like on one wall, like you said, and I'm picturing all of them, just it's gonna look so cool.
Yeah, I might do like 20 of them. We'll see.
Oh my God. There's that motivation.
Yeah. This one I have to stand back from, but you could see it's from floor to ceiling. It's just like an inch and a half from the ceiling. So if I get really close, there's aspects that are more kind of thoughtfully expressed as being more truthful, but then more imaginative just throughout the painting. In fact, I might go even more loose on the portrait. So something that had happened with this painting was that it was really truthful at the beginning, and then I just kept abstracting it. And wow, is it a journey to do that?
Yeah.
But
And it's crazy because it's almost like you said, like a lot of them are still in process. Like, and as you work on one, you realize, hey, this isn't working. I'm gonna do this in the other one too. Like, it's so cool. Like they're all like communicating at the same time.
They're all communicating with each other, and especially since I've been doing this new thing where I'm excavating. So I'm like ripping off parts of the painting.
Oh my God.
So I'm just ripping off like big parts of the painting.
Right.
And then what happens is it abstracts it, but in a way that I feel is the way that I like to abstract. So I'm kind of finding myself like as I'm just like picking off layers. So like I picked off that layer and that layer and that layer. I'm just picking off these sections, and that just becomes a form of the way that I abstract now. So I'm like,
oh, cool.
So I'm like, well, I don't have to be shy about an eye. Like I could just yank off the whole eye if I wanted to.
Oh my God.
So yeah, so taking chances, like sometimes you have to destroy the thing that you love the most about the painting,
Yeah.
so that
Kill
it
your
can stop.
darlings.
Yeah, it has to like stop staring at you right in the eyes, and and then all of a sudden something beautiful might happen. So
Yeah.
let's actually go go through a little bit more.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so this is an early work before I
Hmm.
was academically trained.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and like another interesting thing is that I've been painting abstracts just as long as I've been painting realistically. So this is more of
Mm.
like a semi-abstract painting from like 8 years ago. So I've been
Right.
doing this forever, but a lot of people think that I just started. So
Oh my God.
so this one, I just need to stand a little bit more at a distance. This
Yeah.
one is the forest. So this is the
Hmm.
first painting of the show. Yeah.
I love it. I think I saw it at your apartment.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. It's honest. I think I remember it being like really colorful. Like I know in camera, like cameras can't do paintings justice. They end up being a lot more colorful in person. But damn,
Right.
it's so
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. So yeah, and also essentially like very blue, but I have
Yeah.
orange light on it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that changes it.
Yeah. So yeah, those are all the paintings in the show.
Nice.
For now, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm gonna have like another dozen of those little guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much all of them.
Nice. Well, thank you for showing us everything and for telling us about your process. And I'm excited about the show. It's when is it again?
So it's gonna be February 17th,
Hmm.
2022. So it's coming out fast. And yeah, at SugarLift in Chelsea, Manhattan. Um, and yeah, if anyone wants to like check out my website or anything like that, it's lucasbononi.com. I also instruct online, and wow, that's been an interesting thing because I have students that want me to teach them abstract or students that want me to teach them, like the most kind of traditional type of painting possible, and I love it all. So uh, it's
Nice.
super fun, yeah. But yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Laura, for having me. It
of
means
course.
so much since you are a wonderful painter.
Oh, thank
So it
you.
means a lot to be interviewed by you.
It means a lot to hear that from you because you've been painting for so long, and I'm like, I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going. Well, thank you so much, Lucas. We're gonna link all of your links like in the description, and then of course, your website, the show, and everything. So
Yeah.
thank you again, and I
Thank
hope
you.
you have a really easy time finishing all your 20 paintings.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.